Good evening, all. This week, we are looking at corner control in Guilty Gear on our 2MK Tuesday train. Since Guilty Gear has so much more movement overall, it can be a little harder to tell when you are doing corner control things and when you're just moving around. But most of the same principles we were looking at in other games so far, specifically Street Fighter, apply here. And as usual, it's fairly important by character and matchup. As always, feel free to join our lounge. The information about the ID and password are in the tweet at 2_MK_FGC and should be in the stream title itself. One of the other things that Guilty Gear in particular gives you is a better timing for how to force getting out of the corner, and a higher bonus if you choose to give up the corner on purpose yourself, because your opponent is less likely to be expecting it. With stronger pressure tools and quicker movement, it's relatively easier to hold control of corner things. Your opponent, however, has more tools to deal with the situation, and these tools are generally universal and more so safe than in our comparison game Street Fighter. Your Roman cancel options, relatively high number of invincible wake-ups, and of course, the patented air dash. In general, one stands closer to corner guard in Guilty Gear because of the number of moves the opponent has to use to try to keep control of the situation, and the general range of most characters' pressure tools such as Standing Dust. There are many moves in this game that are made safe if spaced perfectly, or Roman cancelled on certain positions, but become less safe when you are closer to the player. Similarly, if your opponent attempts to air dash out, You don't really want to give them that chance. If your reactions are fast enough, you should clip them on their way, since Guilty Gear jumps, natural jumps, are usually not that far forward, meaning that the opponent must immediately try to get the dash. But while it might seem as if it would make more sense to stand there, where thereabouts they were going to land, there are enough air attacks to make this complicated. So it's better to take advantage of the fact that their standard direct upward jump is relatively slow, and therefore stand at approximately footsie range. This does differ by character, but for the most part you're still looking for the same things. You're just standing closer while you do it. If you do join our lounge, bear in mind that it is a loser stays on lobby, as just demonstrated. You can use this to practice multiple characters that you're not as familiar with if you are intermediate, or get more practice as a beginner. The downside of expecting to have that particular form of corner control is that you're likely to run into opponent buttons more often. They benefit more from hitting buttons in this game, since they're generally either harder to whiff punish or longer and more likely to catch you in the first place. Certain specials, which can be treated similarly, have the same problem. Even a character like Jam, whose normals are generally slow, tends to benefit from hitting buttons to get out of the corner, more so. Furthermore, the basic space control methods that you'd see used by most characters are relatively easy to get past. And it doesn't become harder when you're cornered. This means that often your general aim is to find the longest advantageous attack you can find in your arsenal that doesn't automatically also move you forward, or you can just do it as a hard read. Your aim therefore is to close space with that and then escape outward to your proper position for things. If you spaced it correctly, which is often the main thing that you're using here, you should be okay. In Guilty Gear, therefore, you should mainly think about your advantages in terms of cornering someone. In the other sense we mentioned, they don't get to change their spacing, but you can do cool stuff with yours and make sure your moves end up safe, or that your opponent doesn't know which of your threat options you're about to use. Since this limits so much of their direct motion capacity, you get to do a lot more things. Therefore, you can actually let go of a lot of the technical aspects of corner control from Street Fighter in order to play corner control in Guilty Gear. But you do have to pay attention to the difference in the length of buttons that your character and your opponent's character have, and the speed of those buttons. What you can also count on is that your opponent has to spend a lot more time repositioning once they do manage to get out of the corner. They don't automatically become effective and able to turn on you by having done so. Therefore, watch for your opponent's options and try not to give yourself too much stress based on where you are standing on the screen yourself. One other good option you have, that does not come up in other games obviously, is to fake the escape. And this is actually something that works in mid-screen as well and is often important. Faking the escape refers to moving forward very slightly to provoke your opponent into hitting a button, jumping backward to avoid as many of their potential attacks as possible, and then if you see that they did hit the button, air dashing over their head quickly. This is the main strategy or tactic that is within Guilty Gear that you would not be able to see somewhere else, and it's the equivalent of just jumping out, but rather than being based on expecting your opponent to do a particular thing and or reacting to that thing if they whiff, you are attempting to force the whiff yourself by getting them to react to your forward movement. Depending on your character's distance of standing dust, this may work dually for you because they would be likely to stay out of that range. Characters who have good dive style attacks can just basically use their neutral jump in a very similar way. Since your air dash is available in almost all those situations, the key to this is the same as the neutral jump approach in Street Fighter and other slower games. The aim is to get your opponents to try to do an attack, a lateral one on the ground, because these tend to be safer, and make sure that you are simply not in that space at all, and then quickly get past it. Your opponent must therefore come up with very precise spacings for whatever they are trying to use to lock you down. Kai is good generally at corner control due to his grinder move, preventing a lot of that direct option. However, the grinder itself requires Kai to go into the air himself, and even if you input it quickly, it can still be relatively easy to attack him when he lands or slip past it because he's so delayed in terms of getting back to a defense stance. Your character's options for moving under the grinder, therefore, are your main focuses. If your character has no such options, then obviously you have problems. But it's not as if Kai can lock you down. The move takes too long to become active and get much work done for him. So he doesn't benefit directly from this if you know what you're doing. Despite what you think, your rejection, i.e. blitz, is not actually a very good method for doing this. Despite the fact that it does move you forward and hit the opponent, especially if they were poking, the amount of time it takes for this to happen, and the range at which it normally does happen, means that there's too many counters to this move. And you're then paying meter to do the equivalent of a safe move in another game, except that in this game, you're likely to lose a lot more as a result of it. Locking down characters with good long low attacks like Axel takes a little more work, but not by a lot. Axel's generally slower buttons are offset by his ability to use that, as well as his invincible reversals, to solve his problems in the corner. But just as Axel is generally able to hit you with his lows, he's actually one of the easier characters to whiff punish himself as a result, and you tend to just stand a little further away from him. In other words, Axel is one of the characters in this game, one of the few characters in this game, where you actually do approach corner guard in the exact same way as you do against a Street Fighter style character. This is similarly true because of his long, relatively slower normals, allowing you to move forward and block or do certain types of counterattack to keep him there a little bit more easily. Axel holding you in the corner, on the other hand, is a different beast because he can do this from much further away without worrying as much. He can also counterattack when you attempt to move through certain things. On the other hand, he relatively lacks strong ways of changing his momentum when he's trying to get out using his own air dash and faked out air dash back jump setups. He He can somewhat use his Roman cancels to do this, but if he was cornered before he cornered you, i.e. some form of side switch, he may not have enough for it. Jam's ways out of things have a lot more to do with being daring and understanding how many charges of certain cards she has available. But at the very least, it's relatively easy for Jam to buy enough space to build up cards while re-cornering herself with those cards. This is not generally as much of a threat for her. In other words, she acts as a character who lets herself get cornered in order to build up the tool which will get her back out of it. Depending on your style of play, this may be terrible for you, while not really bothering Jam at all. Chip is also able to play this sort of keep away style by learning to watch for the opponent's approach right afterwards and figure out where to go from there. Similarly, because of her reactive abilities, she can spend a lot more time further away from you and keep the corner trap going if she has the correct cards to do so. When she lacks the cards, the situation shifts. At that point, she must play it out as a regular character, or take some damage to get out by just doing a risky move that buys her a lot of space, but take some damage. Most characters can easily guard Jam even if she does this, because it doesn't really affect them too much. However, her relatively strong and quick ability to whiff punish with both her Gekurin and Yujin mean that you really don't get to push a lot of buttons when Jam has you cornered, and you have to look for your spaces and chances much more carefully. The simplest answer, of course, is to wait for Jam to try to charge a card and air dash over her head. She might be able to catch you depending on how quickly you can react, but as a whole, this is easier than trying to deal with her by hitting her yourself. Kai's capability to lock Axel down with grinders in the corner is relatively strong. Because again, this is effectively a character that must play by quote-unquote Street Fighter rules, or the rules of what people would consider non-anime, non-Air Dasher games, but is facing a character who does not have to play by those rules and therefore has some options to lock them down that don't involve it. The main difficulty is that Kai must get close before Axel can take any action regarding this, and do it without Axel actually getting any spacing advantages at all. Otherwise, the grinder itself will be misspaced and it will be too difficult for Kai to gain any advantage of it. Once he's lost control of that, he then must change his game plan at least slightly to take a read on it, because the Axel player then becomes able to react to the grinder entirely, usually because they're too far away to be hurt by trying to hit Kai. This forces us into a very rapid cycling of mental states for the Kai player, where they're constantly identifying if they are in the correct range to use the grinder, and if not, doing something else. Against Kai, Jam needs a lot less in terms of options for getting out, but she needs a lot more of her options in order to keep him there, making for a very complex setup in the match, because while Jam can corner Kai quickly, it's relatively useless if she doesn't have any card stock. Relying on her meter, therefore, is a lot easier to do and requires less confirms as a whole, leading to the same sort of mental switching. If Jam has enough cards, she can do one type of corner trap, and if she does not, she needs to do the other type. However, it gets even more complicated when you take into account the fact that if Jam has certain cards, she's actually less likely to be able to give proper pressure in particular spaces. Fortunately, an opponent who is generally playing defensively with Kai will often give Jam a lot of space and timing to build up cards. Once she has enough of them, and Kai manages to get cornered, which is again not so hard for her to achieve, resetting the situation is relatively easier. But if you don't have the right card stock, it really doesn't matter. What you do benefit from, though, is the ability to build up the risk meter at really high levels during this process. So let's look at that with actual effort put into doing it, rather than effort put into demonstrating it. Jam doesn't have a strong reason to build Gyakurin first. The thing she needs the most is that. This helps with both confirms and just general situations to make Kai's life miserable when he tries to get out. However, it also acts as a fundamentally useful distraction. Since there are a lot of things that Kai wants to be able to do in neutral and in the corner to get out of corner's positions that are changed when Jam has this. But having the dragon, on the other hand, for example, makes no difference really to this. Except that the dragon is threatening enough to let you build up the other cards. But because you don't generally want to build Gyakurin for this reason, you have to decide how much of other things to build up. Therefore, overall speaking, if you have the dragon and you don't expect Kai to throw the fireball, build something else. Because the something else is what you need in order to keep the corner trapped. Whereas the Gyakurin is not so good at full power for getting people to stay in the corner. It's more so for helping Jam to get out of it. You can also make these decisions based on how much you've managed to be cornered so far, or how far you are away from the corner at that moment. Kai's relatively lower ability to do long-range, high-speed pursuit, combined with Ino's strong air dash, means that generally, if Kai is close enough to put up grinders and Ino can avoid them, she will get away as soon as she manages to slip through at all. Therefore, whether or not one does this is a lot to be decided by whether or not you feel as if you can win that matchup by zoning or footsies as Kai. The payoff for trapping Ino with the grinders is not that high, but you do build up a lot of both meter and overall damage. Even if you can't convert into anything. Those few moments where you can convert are good, large payoffs. But in short, if you are good at counter zoning with Kai, and aren't worried about Ino's note, then you should generally let her get out. Whereas you're not really letting her get out, you are using grinder and accepting the chance that she will. If you expect that you will have more trouble there and prefer to try to play footsies with her, you may want to try to do that outright so that she ends up back in footsie range at the moment she tries to get out, since you will be standing further back and therefore more able to react or chase her. The superior spacing control allowed by the corner means that this is the one spot in the game where Ino gets to use her standing dust as a serious offense against Axel. Rather than having to try to open him up any other way, she can use both the pushback and the threat of it without taking too much damage off the whiff punishes herself most of the time. Axel must commit to more dangerous moves for himself, and moves that can even allow her to get big setups or combos. As mentioned before, Jam is not a character who generally spends a lot of time trying to make absolutely sure the opponent is cornered. Her shorter range than nearly everyone in the game buttons-wise means that she doesn't benefit that much from it, but rather benefits from the small pressure situations and annoying stressors that you can place on people as a result. However, eventually if a Jam player realizes that you are likely to try to stay in the corner and wait and watch for her to build up cards, you may have a different perspective on it once she starts to use this. If you must trap your opponent in the corner, therefore, your best option is to use very short fake outs of the Hapo Shinsho attack as it covers a lot of space over their heads and blocks a lot of instant air dash attempts. If your opponent crosses over you within a certain time frame, you can combo it into Senri Shinsho to go back the other way and potentially hit them if they were starting to come down. This does not work on Ino because her air dash is completely lateral and she doesn't land at the same time as other people. For Kai in this matchup, the key is recognizing when you need to quickly recover from being hit by one of Axel's invincible or just skilled timing wake-ups, and immediately put back on pressure in some quick way, usually using your Roman Cancel. But depending on the timings of the two players and how far you actually ended up, his invincible move will send you really far away, but some of his other options are generally quite good, but do not actually throw you so far out. Kai can use quite a few of his crouching normals, interestingly, to cover both the space in front of him for other Axel buttons, and any attempt Axel makes to go over his head or use his forward heavy. Since Ino's options end up limited in the base sense, she really does often want to get in close enough to at least try her standing dust, and force Axel to take certain actions of his own as a result. It further helps that she can use her Roman Cancel at any time to change the trajectory and the setups involved in that particular interaction. Since it's difficult to find a lot of other uses for her meter in this matchup, it's actually in her best interest to push back the opponent, attempt to get that corner pressure going. And remember to use the meter for more or less that purpose. Any upward movement by Axel can be dealt with by a well-timed Roman cancel from Ino. And then of course, whatever you choose to use as her method of stopping the situation from getting any worse. This is of course a lot less useful in the mid-screen and the mid-game because the buttons Ino needs to use to do this don't give her enough advantage off the Roman cancel. Jam's goal here, therefore, is to take advantage of the fact that Ino's escapes actually take up so much of her time. And since Ino has very few full screen attacks and no grounded dash, it is much more difficult for her to properly put pressure on Jam for charging cards. This increases Jam's damage potential drastically. And it's the corner trap situation. Basically a free charge. But you can see here that despite Jam's general control of the match in terms of flow, without enough cards to deal the damage, Ino could turn this around a lot more easily. Ino's offensive options toward Jam from mid-screen in the corner are actually relatively difficult to execute as they involve instant air dash aerial dust, which is not exactly the easiest thing to time or space. The response to it is a simple standing slash or forward punch. You can see this if you have watched the Combo Breaker Grand Finals between Teresa and Daurino. The match is almost entirely that. Similarly, Kai, who Ino can use her standing dust against often, could get away from it by jumping, but she could then Roman cancel it and catch him pretty easily, especially if she has a lot of meter. This is not even that hard a skill to build up, as you actually want to do the Roman cancel later into the stand dust in order to be most effective. And since the move takes relatively long, you have quite a while to confirm whether or not you should Roman cancel it. Kai in turn is often too committed, and if you wait long enough, he won't be able to bait you into anything. Learning when to Roman cancel out of grounded moves on reaction to the opponent's movement is a relatively useful skill for Ino players. Though it may not be so useful at the base level of play, once you understand how to play the character, it becomes a lot more necessary. In the fortunate moment where Axel himself happens to space himself against Ino in the corner like that, she can also use her standing dust to try to escape him. Therefore, it is generally more important to try to move to the correct position than to either zone or go for combos. As it increases Ino's options a lot and decreases Axel's options by, well, not a whole lot, but it's certainly better for Ino to be going up against Axel's myriad of options with more of her own. Therefore, the easiest way to remember how to deal with this matchup is that Ino should generally try not to use her meter when she is near the corner, or when she's near the middle of the screen, and save it for when she is near the corner, either being put in it or attempting to hold her opponent in it. Being cornered makes it harder to set up any zoning whatsoever. It makes the matchup overall harder to play. However, an opponent who knows that you might Roman cancel out of something to escape must now factor this in, and that means that you get chances to just air dash up. Mostly because Axel cannot stand at the same spots. You can see that because Jam has the ability to move at that speed and be unpredictable in particular ways, any linear vector that her opponent takes is relatively easily counterable. Kai removes the linearity of his air vectors by using Grinder and his air Sun Dipper at the perfect moment, but in order to make sure that he can get away with this all the time, you have to have a much higher awareness. And you don't tend to get much damage on Jam while you're trying to do it. So while she does not tend to get her bigger combos that way either, the battle of attrition can definitely still go in her direction. But we are back to Kai and Axel and the various methods of corner trapping they have on both their sides. Axel needs to stay at exactly this range, because Kai can, as you've just seen, not really fly out of that. However, he has some really strange options if he's willing to defend long enough. Once he is the one cornering Axel, his crouching buttons from a closer range where they would barely hit or barely riff become the main option. These options tend to put more pressure on Axel than most standard poking attacks, partially because of their slight vacuum effect, and partially because of their delayed and better hitboxes. They also allow Kai to maintain his blocking position for much longer before he has to worry about anything. Meaning it's a lot easier to react to things that Axel does quickly, rather than having to worry about perfecting your spacing or placing yourself back in the right position after hitting with a standing slash or similar and being blocked. The pushback on Kai's standing moves makes it harder to keep Axel in the corner, whereas his crouching moves tend to save the situation better toward being in his favor. This forces Axel to commit to a lot of harder things and doesn't really get him as far. And absolutely what you want to do to your opponent when they're in the corner already is stress them out as much as possible. Against an Ino like this who is willing to outright attempt to whiff punish you from those positions by going into the air, the Kai player should assume that it's more important to keep that Ino in the corner than it is to get the damage. you'll notice that generally Ino's aerial buttons, her actual attacks, generally don't help that much. It's why you seldom see people use things other than her jumping dust and jumping slash. However, the usefulness of her jumping dust should not be underestimated for making long attacks or the same instant air dash or even sometimes the regular dash for her. From Kai's side, therefore, against this type of Ino, it's easier to just defend in the corner and do that. Vapor thrusts to get through situations that come up. This crouch heavy is often also effective, but tends to get whiff punished by various things. Ino can also delay her dive attack, so that it might not actually collide. Meaning that you're better off just waiting there to do your invincible move and knock her away. Ino's zoning is therefore able to prevent Jam from actually building a lot of cards, but unfortunately it doesn't actually zone Jam all that well. Since Jam has so many aerially superior buttons, it's difficult to make her not do certain things. And she pays a lot less attention to the damage taken from the notes themselves than most characters have to. Their superiority alone can cause Ino problems in this matchup. Because once one note is out, she cannot necessarily use another. Holding the correct space and the correct cards are definitely things that Ino can do things about, however. All she has to do generally is move into position rather than trying to hold her current position. This of course puts her at risk for getting hit by the Dragon Kick, but Ino can generally deal with this a little bit better, especially if she has a note out in front of her to just cover the trajectory of that move alone, rather than trying to actually hit Jam with it. And there you see Kai's other method of dealing with Ino in the corner. Rather than bothering with the air grinder, he can just use the ground one. This approach solves a lot more problems than one would initially expect, because of the way Ino's moves work, especially in terms of their hitboxes and hurtboxes. This is not necessarily something Kai wants to do precisely on a knockdown, but rather to do it in such a way that Ino will get up and have just enough time to try an attack before interacting with that grinder. Similar to Jam's approach, realizing that Ino will generally have to go far over your head in order to do anything, and therefore will not directly pose a threat, means that you can just go, well, I'm going to let her get away, but if she doesn't, I have that space completely covered. Any hesitation on Ino's part to attempt the escape, effectively immediately on their wake up, means that Kai gets to do things. However, Kai does have to be careful because, as noted, he has far less chase down options. So you have to be relatively confident that you can continue to win even after she has attempted her escape directly. This isn't to say that this should be your main approach only. You can definitely mix it up with the air grinder and other things, but you should add it in for her. As previously mentioned, one of Ino's largest problems with escaping the corner is that she is not a character who can do it while re-cornering the opponent, except by using her riskiest escapes. That is partially the reason why Kai uses the grinder and why Axel uses things like his standing dust. To force Ino to use methods of escaping the corner that will not re-corner them, and will just put them back into the same neutral that they were playing previously. After all, if you manage to corner Ino once from middle of the screen, you should generally assume you can do it again. Unlike most characters of Jam's design, she is actually relatively equipped to make sure that if the opponent keeps on doing particular things at particular spaces, she can just do a specific move to counter it. This is almost always true because she has a lot of options with her moves, and even if she does not have it with the base version, she can power up the card with it. can see sometimes how what would seem to be an otherwise dominant match becomes a close one because of a hard read, a failed corner guard. Generally, the situation being allowed to shift because the player with advantage has some difficulty holding it. It's just that often in this form of game, the corner advantage is the biggest one you can have without giving up a lot of resources yourself. The corner positioning advantage just eventually happens on its own as a result of momentum. But let's move on to looking at how this is done when Jam straightly does not go for pressure, or when the opponent has managed to green block FD her out to the point where her basic pressure doesn't work. Quite a few of Jam's pressure options can be kept up almost indefinitely, but not if the opponent can green block out of it. At this point, Jam is forced to use her air superiority and high reaction speed to stop the opponent from doing certain things. If you lack the reaction speed, it becomes almost impossible to do. It's easy to find yourself defaulting to your pressure tools just so that your opponent has to keep quiet a little longer and you don't end up as stressed on what responses you need to have. But against a strong enough opponent, this won't matter at all. They'll just defend it all because it's relatively easy to see. Depending on the player or their character, you can get them with certain things. But that becomes your strongest tool for the situation. Primarily because eventually your opponent will think of blocking it and allow you to do this. However, your spacing and control in order to do that particular sequence has to be fairly close to perfect, if not entirely perfect. And even then, it does not work on every character, and it works differently by character. Fortunately, the reward for doing it correctly is relatively high, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Still, this is a natural progression of fighting games. When you have the opportunity, attempt to build up a skill that will be needed at the higher levels. But if you start to lose, you can use your fallback. You can use this either to handicap yourself against an opponent who cannot keep up with you, or to give them a chance to learn to deal with multiple things if you're just training like this. It will also help you get used to doing the two interchangeably and either actually being random or figuring out what it is about the game that makes you feel comfortable enough to switch from one to the other. Baiken is a relatively simple character when it comes to corner guarding. Jump, straight up. That's basically all you do. Almost all of Baiken's good corner guard options appear primarily from her standing at the max range for her buttons, or generally the max range for her opponent's buttons, and just neutral jumping. From there, it's somewhat a matter of reactions, but it's not too difficult to do, as she has things to cover quite a lot of situations. If you space yourself correctly and your opponent hasn't attempted to move forward, as in micro step forward as a result of your neutral jump, you should be fine. And those who start to do that too often become fodder for certain of her other moves. It's all about feeling comfortable with the timing and the fact that you can just watch your opponent, since you know exactly how a neutral jump will go. You can't change your direction in the air anymore. If you just jump straight up with nothing special about it, then you're in the air. That's it. For getting out of the corner, it comes down to how much health she has left and how much damage she wants to take. If the answer is 0, I can't afford to take any damage, then she's usually in a really bad situation, because she has very few good corner escapes from that position that don't involve putting herself at massive risk. However, she has a lot of different corner escapes that put her at very small risk, meaning that it's hard to keep Baiken in the corner for long until her health is quite low. This is actually the same principle by which Baiken plays mid-screen neutral against characters with longer buttons than her or who don't want to move backwards. Axel is generally less equipped to deal with Baiken's pressure in the corner. Even though he can hit her, he often won't get out of the corner as a result of doing so. Nor does he tend to put her at a space that is particularly disadvantageous to her. So he has to commit fairly hard most of the time. However, keeping Baiken in the corner as Axel is a little bit easier, as he can stand fairly far away and deal with the situation from there. Forcing Baiken out is a good way to deal with this, but the move that is being used now tends to put Baiken at a space, as mentioned, where she's not all that unhappy. She can either try to get back in, or go for her claw, or even just certain crouching moves, standing dust, micro walks into things. As long as she blocks correctly, there's very little that is directly gained as a result. Axel's better bet against Baiken, therefore, at least most of them, is actually to do what he normally doesn't do. Push and try to corner her, and take all the benefits from that. Then take up his guard position, and deal as much damage as possible before she eventually escapes through one of her many moves. Fortunately for Axel, his corner escapes that are actually risky have big payoffs when they work. More than working out the difference for those situations in which he's forced to use something that Baiken can simply come back in right after. Adding his Roman cancel to this makes it even easier, as she has to hesitate even when those things are done. In this matchup, unlike the Kai one, Jam charges the Gekurin because there's really nothing that Viking can do about it once she's in that position. In fact, Jam doesn't specifically need to charge it in order to make it effective, but it does help a little bit. As Viking has the capacity to stand further away to do these things. Missing will usually result in this situation where it is now Viking that is cornered, and from there similar to fighting the way Kai should against Axel. Stand in front of her and hit a lot of crouching moves. When you find yourself in that situation where you have Viking cornered as a result of some good luck but don't have any cards, you can't keep her there. Basically, the character is effectively immune to being trapped by Jam without Jam putting herself at a lot of risk if Jam is the one with no cards. Therefore, you might as well let her escape. You can try to do your best to control the way she goes and how much she gets out of it when she escapes. But all your advantage disappears quite quickly because of her advantages in the spacing. Fortunately, as you can see, since the dragon is much less helpful than it is against Kai, you don't need to charge it as much, and therefore can use that same space to charge the same Gekurin. However, this causes a huge problem in neutral because charged Gekurin does not help anywhere near as much for actually keeping pressure up on her. Leaving you with some difficult decisions as to which cards will matter at which point, and therefore which ones to push forward with. Exactly how the player approaches this is pretty much up to them, but the one I can say that I prefer is the fact that Viking is a character who tends to get hit by puffballs and therefore carry through the corner fairly easily, so it's more sensible to charge Jam's ways of keeping her there and worry about the rest after. Obviously, you could go for Gekurin pressure and damage in mid-screen and knockdown trickery. Viking is relatively susceptible to this, and this will let you put a lot of pressure on her, especially if she doesn't have a lot of meter yet. This is probably the better method overall if you are confident that you can get the knockdown very early into the match. This is particularly useful if the Viking opponent is at least somewhat aggressive and is likely to get clipped by one of your moves and face a hard knockdown. Kai's other methods for keeping Baiken in the corner are very similar to what he does with Axel, hitting a lot of crouching moves just in front of her, while preparing to do certain things. It's simply that with Baiken you have to be prepared for more things. And generally expect that she'll be a little better at getting out than Axel is, but won't hurt you as much in the process. In the corner, Kai vs Baiken is interesting because since these characters mostly play footsies through block stun to push their opponent to the particular position they want rather than moving around, it functionally is a lot like mid-screen. Nothing really changes for them there. They continue to effectively play footsies even if Baiken is cornered. Therefore, as the Baiken player, you have the option to simply not try to escape at all. However, if you notice that the Kai is back off to the point where they are able to whiff punish you with certain moves without being in range of most of yours, and you don't feel confident that you can get certain things executed, i.e. instant Kamimat or reaction claw, you might want to try your escape then, because it's probably that they're setting up for something. Fortunately, Baiken has a lot of forward-moving things that don't necessarily cause her to take too much damage, but just like here, as you can see, once her health gets low enough, holding her in the corner is much easier as she cannot take the risks that she can normally take to just take a bit of a hit and use that to get out. Baiken can also treat Axel like this in quite a few situations because of the relative speed of their buttons. The wide arc covered by certain of Baiken's standing and crouching buttons means that dealing with Axel when he even tries to go into the air is still functionally fairly easy. She basically gets to just hit certain buttons when she believes that he is going to block. Having those buttons available as options means it's harder for Axel to be sure whether or not he has to deal with Baiken's standing dust or her jump attacks. Even her basic standing heavy slash can be a problem for him at certain ranges. Her strength in this situation is her ability to hit from really far away and still convert into biggish damage. When she can't immediately outright convert, it's often that if she was at max range, the space created by hitting with the move, or even sometimes being blocked, allows her to go for another one that is relatively advantageous, forcing Axel to rely primarily on hard reads and invincible moves. Baiken must, however, generally not try to pressure and must backdash or take a single jump back to get back to her optimal position while Axel gets up, if her goal is to keep him in the corner. Since pressuring a character with an invincible reversal, you basically will use it, given that the options are generally not much better if he refuses to. Baiken tends to win out more the other way. Jam's relatively quick recovery from that move, plus the fact that most of Baiken's efforts for keeping this position don't allow her to actually do any trajectory-altering attacks from the air, means that you're unlikely to be punished for trying it. Overall, this means that the general thing one is trying to learn in the Kai matchup for Baiken is just to make your footsies as good as possible. Reaction speed follows on from there. And a basic understanding of how to convert off of her standing dust into good damage would be the third part. As usual, King does not focus so much on actually learning the combo until they're relatively confident that the situation will be created often enough for the combo to matter. Fortunately for Baiken, Kai does not tend to do that much damage to her when she messes up in that position or has trouble catching him on the rails of the corner. Most likely the move she used that allowed him to get out will recover quickly enough that he won't actually get hurt for using it. The same thing happens at the footsies level here. Kai is generally not able to punish Baiken very heavily for making certain attempts at escape, even if they fail. Other characters are much more capable of doing this. Baiken's ability to push Kai back while playing this form of footsies means, as just shown, the corner phase doesn't necessarily last that long. Kai can extend it by going for pressure instead of trying to corner guard in the first place, but we are discussing corner guard as an entirety thing, and corner pressure is something most people can work out on their own.
刃に乗せる思いは力。しかし、思いに乗せる刃は狂気に過ぎません。足かせのついた刀では、あなたの実力が陰るだけですよ。
To resolve the general problems that Baiken has in this matchup as a result of Axel's invincible reversal and needing to move back into position. It's often easier to slow down the entire match and think about whether or not you could get away from Axel after certain things. But here we have the knockdown, for example, and the instant jump back tatami mat, which by itself more or less locks down the situation. It is not really a form of pressure, as Axel can easily see it coming. But the fact that he must defend it is important. It basically means that you do not get to escape Baiken just because she gave you some space. The rest of it, therefore, as mentioned, comes down to reactions and being able to make sure that whenever you do get an opening, you have the right move ready to punish Axel with. This is, of course, the much harder part. But you can see there that keeping Axel in the corner when you have the right spacing and mindset is absolutely achievable. Once you've learned to do that, then you can work on making sure you hit him every time when he gives you an opening or dealing damage. But as shown, Baiken ended up with too little health to use any of her good corner escapes. Note, however, that your corner escapes are still just risks. They're good because they allow you to sometimes escape the corner at the cost of some health, but they also have the potential to just work outright. So if you have no other options, you might as well try for one of them. And Jam, being a sensible woman in a world of superpowered people with big weapons, has no qualms about hitting people while they're down. Make sure to push forward on your opponent when they are in the corner, unless you are sure that your character has a lot of defensive options for if they decide to go straight into their own attack. That is, if you feel as if you must play footsies, try to play a little bit forward footsies so that your opponent is tempted to hit things. While this can be harder, if you don't, most people with a good defensive sense will just sit there and take advantage of the fact that you are the one trying to react to them. Part of the reason why, as you see, matches between these two players take so long is because they are both trying to very slowly pull out every little bit of damage they can from their footsies. It would seem as if the easy answer to this sort of situation would be to just learn longer combos. But given that at least Viking and Kai have very similar damage, you'd be turning it into an arms race that you're not necessarily sure you could win. If your footsies is not good enough, learning the longer combo will absolutely give you the advantage over someone who hasn't learned it, as long as their footsies are also not good enough yet. But after being hit by large combos, quite a few people will simply go learn their own large combos. And you'll be back where you started. except that it will feel more random and it will be harder to build up skill. But let's look at Baiken's other secret weapon for dealing with being cornered by Axel. Baiken can almost always, in base situations, once she's shown a willingness to try to deal with situations in other ways, just randomly throw out the claw when cornered in order to deal with a bunch of stuff that Axel would otherwise want to do. This is because of the interaction between her claw and some of Axel's moves. This interaction makes it easier for her to land stuff regarding it. Part of the reason this works is because of the way they push back on Axel's moves work. If you watch carefully when someone blocks Axel's moves mid-screen, most of the pushback happens on their side. This is partially to help him keep up his style as a character who does this sort of thing. The player needs to be able to know that they are going to stay where they are blocked or hit, so the opponent takes most of the pushback. The result of this is that when Axel is the one pushing those same attacks on a cornered opponent, the pushback behaves a bit differently. This also means you can have different reactions to being hit by certain moves in neutral and when cornered. And it is this property that makes it possible for Baiken to just use her claw in neutral against, well, in corner against Axel after being hit in certain situations. With pushback would have changed relative to both the character's positions and potential. Whereas when she is the one holding him in the corner, she has to try to get around the fact that he can use those moves. As you can see there, she ends up being pushed back quite far when she tries these. Axel vs. Jam corner game is a little bit more complicated because it's so much more dependent on the spacing between the characters than any other. Jam uses a completely different button to deal with Axel in the corner than she does at any other part of the match. Axel in turn can use his invincible moves to deal with Jam a lot of problems. And his general capacity to outdamage her just adds to that. Jam must therefore make a lot of evasive style attacks where she's not actually aiming at Axel, but aiming to make Axel react so she can punish him. Most of her meter will generally be devoted to this. Linear attacks will solve this problem only if Axel is very, very twitchy. However, there is a different way to play both that and this matchup. As mentioned before in certain Street Fighter discussions, When the opponent is very defensive and doesn't necessarily know how to pin you down, you are free to use Jam's mobility instead of her attacking prowess. If your opponent cannot attack you because they cannot latch onto you, or must take much larger risks in order to do it, you basically automatically have advantage. Because it is very easy to escape from someone who thinks you are going for pressure by simply not doing that. From there, it becomes a matter of your reaction speed and avoiding taking too much damage in combos. Meaning that Jam has an interesting potential to approach Axel by not approaching Axel. However, all of these tactics consistently depend on the intention to time out the match and the life lead. Things you cannot necessarily count on, even if you got it. Depending on the skill of your opponent, you convert their neutral into bigger damage, and their constant gain of meter based on your retreat. You may not be able to count on holding on to that life lead. However, if you realize your opponent generally does almost all of their damage to you by breaking your offense, and they have not yet demonstrated that they know how to break your defense or evasion, you can take this approach instead. It is actually true of many rushdown style characters in many games. The way you can tell whether or not it is available to you is mostly dependent on how many frame trap style attacks they have that discourage the opponent from doing anything, and their mobility in how quickly and effectively they can retreat or avoid certain moves. Some characters are designed such that they have really good pressure and mix-ups like this, but don't have particularly good retreat. And therefore those are the ones that must in fact devote themselves to getting the opponent in the mix-up. Fortunately, they're usually given better tools for this purpose than just relatively repetitive frame traps.
でもお相手します。はい、勝ちだ。ストレート。刃に乗せる思いは力。しかアクセル、バザー、バイケン。さあ楽しもうぜ。恨み殺したデュエルワンやった。
Axel's benefit to this is a lot more about whether or not he has enough meter by the time he gets cornered to green block at least some of the things Viking intends to do. Doing this allows him to take space advantage and forces Viking to stop attacking, or to take a much more risky approach to that attack. But more importantly, it also spaces her out such that her jumping and neutral jumping are less effective. As seen there, Viking also benefits from having her burst available, so that in certain situations where Axel does get to punish her, he's unable to continue that big escape combo that normally does so much damage. As Axel doesn't often require Viking to use her burst in neutral, she can generally save it for situations like that, when the match is close, or Axel has managed to do all this and still have a lot of meter somehow. This forces him to return to the use of his invincible reversal, so this is really not a bad thing for Axel in this matchup most of the time anyway. The main problem it poses is when Viking repositions correctly after the corner knockdown, as it tends to whiff, and while it does not necessarily make him too vulnerable, there are a couple of things she can do to make his life miserable from there. If you have a move that is strong against your opponent's safest corner option, it can be a good idea to throw it out occasionally, especially when you feel they're already under stress but are not feeling particularly cornered yet. In other words, do it as soon as you corner them so that they immediately have tried to use their main corner escape, the safe one, and you can get a big payoff from it. Kai suffers in a somewhat similar way against Baiken, in that once he has lost enough health, his corner escape options are generally a lot less effective, and he's restricted from using some because he would instantly die. Baiken's strong ability to do damage from single hits or simple 2 hits means that he can't afford to make too many mistakes there. However, as he doesn't have a whole lot of really good immediate options, he generally has to take the bet and just go for it. Whereas once he has health like this, he can focus on what should happen after his fail, as it is likely to be very similar to a scramble situation, and he might be able to get some random damage or something that will help him get away. The lower Baiken's health gets, the more likely this is good for Kai, as even trades or hard to understand situations lead to advantage in his case. As one's skills build, you can tie this sort of thing and this sort of awareness in with your understanding of how much meter you have available, to help you make decisions, not necessarily about what you should do when absolutely under pressure, but when you have a clear way of using the meter for an escape, but might need it for something else. You can decide whether or not it's worth your time to try to use it. Similar for your burst. That situation, for example, favored Baiken because going for that heavy attack right then created this situation where the time is eventually going to run out, but Kai spent so much time focusing on defense that when the Baiken chooses to run away, it's unlikely that Kai will catch her in time to take off the remaining health. In slower games, just confusing your opponent with attack styles like this is not generally a good idea. In Guilty Gear, if you aren't at max level yet or particularly high level yet, this is not only a good way to discover new technology, but just to add to the stress level of your opponent and sometimes make the match a little more flashy. Beware of doing this against opponents who tend to do things based on trying to damage you through defense, because they'll generally have a lot of punishes ready and just be waiting for that sort of thing in the first place. You do have to establish some precedent first before you go for that sort of Hail Mary, as they call it. This is another matchup where you can sometimes just sit on the life lead and expect it to give you a victory. Either character can do this, but Kai is a little better suited for it than Axel is, because Kai can give the impression that he is going to attack to put Axel players into a defensive mode and buy himself a few seconds on the clock. The longer an Axel player is willing to stay in the defense mode, the higher advantage Kai has. However, it's important not to stay in defense too long, as Axel's superior range and better space control mean that Kai can't really react to Axel beginning to move forward from a fully defensive mindset of his own, without at least risking taking some damage. Rather, you need to learn to read your opponent's state and simply attack with your safest possible attack at the moment you feel that they are starting to become comfortable and thinking about launching their own. As just demonstrated, it's quite helpful to have burst, so that even if you do get caught in something, you don't tend to take too much damage for it. You can also stop a lot of your attacks short, because Axel's range advantage has disappeared at that point. Over time, Kai ends up building up more meter than Axel in this form of the matchup, and efficient use of it can lead to a lot of things. Similarly, this situation is just the same as the Baiken one. Kai absolutely could just run for a few seconds and win the game automatically. But one could not do that by simply attempting to run the entire time, as Kai is neither evasive enough nor damaging enough when the opponent makes a mistake to quickly throw their health back to below his if they happen to get through. This sort of plan can be undertaken fairly early into it if you have enough of a life lead to make your opponent think a certain way, or if you've been using a particular style of play that makes them look for openings in your offense that they can punish, especially if you have been mostly successfully avoiding having said openings.
文武両道彩色権利何をやってますげってのは勝つ喜びより負ける楽観の方が大きそうだ。メンゴ
As usual, we're going into what is our last match of the night. Join us tomorrow for Sandbag Casuals in Street Fighter V, where we will be continuing to look at this week's theme of corner control, but probably with Cody, who has not yet been explored in this way. On Thursday, corner control in Dragon Ball FighterZ and the combo bouts mentioned, which will lead to and from those situations. And on Friday, we'll be going through how to use our current Nash bot and potentially Alex bot to practice these things without actually having to do too much difference. You can consider them preemptive staccatas, but they might not end up being specifically that. Join us next week, Monday, for more Mishmashing Lounge in Street Fighter V. And of course, back around to Tuesday Train, Guilty Gear. The anticlimactic bar slash ending. With that, we bring this Tuesday train to a stop, and we all get on off. This has been Meridian for 2_MK. Good night, everyone.